So many years ago, when I was a wee child, I was taken to see The Phantom of the Opera. I became obsessed with the idea of turning my bedroom into an opera house. It never happened, but now I am an adult and I can do whatever I want.
Some kids like to play, others just sort of wait for adulthood.
So I built a tiny opera house and put it on my bookshelf, and now you get to watch me make it.
Yes, so it is.
I say stick to the plan.
So I started by gathering a bunch of reference materials, and I wanted to find stuff that was visually distinct from the Paris Opera House because that has been done before. So I settled on the Margraville Opera House in Bayreuth, Germany, and used that as my primary inspiration. There's a really cool 360 website of it where you can kind of look around and look at all the details. I'm not that interested in historical accuracy here. I just wanted to make something tiny and opulent and gorgeous and aesthetically pleasing that I can gaze into forevermore. We're gonna have a little, like, Poseidon dudes with tridents and some cherubs and mermaids and clamshells and all that Botticelli de zhuzh.
Some type of like a cocoon grows. So as I'm walking down the runway, I'm gonna grow. Okay, great.
Next, I made some drawings and some test pieces. I made this little mini version of what I was gonna do. As you can see, there's gonna be a mirror down the middle. And then finally, I made this little diva out of some air dry clay and a rubber baby, who's gonna help me make sure that everything is to scale. I cut out some foam core. Yes, I wish it was wood. Yes, I wish I had a laser cutter. I had neither. So I transferred my drawing to the wall and started to build the structure for the boxes that will go on the side. I built the walls and ceilings to slope down slightly, which creates a forced perspective effect. I cut out these flower pot shapes and then these little lip pieces and started gluing them all over the walls. And then we come to my favorite thing in the whole world, which is the hot glue gun. If you put a line of hot glue down, you can go over it again with the tip of the glue gun. It sort of creates a goopy trim. The thing about Baroque architecture, it's very complicated and overwhelming and extremely detailed, but when you shrink it down to miniature and kind of make a mess, if you paint it gold, it looks fancy. You're gonna need to trust the process, but we're gonna get there in the end together. I believe in you. Okay, thank you. It's miniature. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's no big deal. It's just for fun. Trust the process. Then I poked a bunch of holes in the wall with a hammer. I then widened those holes with a screw. And finally I shoved fiber optic cable through the holes and wired it to the back of the wall. I then sanded the ends of the fiber optic cords so that they would let out a little more light. It's basically like a piece of fishing line that you put a light on one end and it shines out on the other end.
Does it feel good? Yeah.
If you remember Miss Diva from before, I took the same baby and made a little mold of its face and started to make an army of little baby heads. These will watch over everyone from the front of the boxes and look generally awesome. I stick the babies to the box seats, surround them with a ring of clay that I make into sort of like a sun pattern, and then just make squiggles and lines and general texture all the way around the outside of all of that. Again, we just need the texture. It does not have to be detailed. Once it's gold, your eye will fill it in and it'll look like plants and flowers and squigglies. For now, it just looks like mess. And that's okay. Are you trusting the process yet? Once that's done, I cut out a bunch more little cardboard pieces and made the proscenium, which is what goes around the front of the stage. With a little more hot glue, it is time to paint.
How are we supposed to do this? Are we which way do you go?
Up and down, girl.
Yay, you made it. And now we are at the fun part where it starts to not look like a bunch of cardboard and hot glue and clay. I started with several indecisive coats of dark blue that will be covered up by other colors. This is just a base coat to make everything one color. We're just building up from shadows to light tones in order to give all this hot glue and clay and tiny babies some depth. I started with dark blue instead of black to keep the shadows from being too dark. So there's a little bit less contrast where it shows through and hopefully helps sell the forced perspective even more. Maybe. I don't know if it did anything. I then went over all the walls with this hideous aqua color and eventually came to my senses and went all over it again with a much more neutral green. Now, joy of joys, we get to the gold. I mixed just a regular gold acrylic paint with some gold powder that I got. It's like a pearlescent gold powder. It just gives it extra metallic. I don't know if it does anything, but I think it makes it more shiny. And I love it like that. Then I just do like a very, very wet dry brush over all of the boxes, and then because I got carried away and just was having too much fun, I did it over all the walls too. Which makes that hot glue pop. And look at that. Everything's coming together. I'm so happy with how the little boxes turned out. And so is Miss Divalicious. What else is there to say? I made a bunch of mermaids and cherubs and tassels. So I made these little cardboard mock-ups of the walls just so that I could see how everything was going to fit without using the real thing. I started with some torch-bearing mermaids to go on the sides of the royal box, which is the big one in the front. At this point, the air-dry clay was pissing me off because it was drying really fast and very crumbly and just totally impossible to work with. So I switched to a black Super Sculpey that also wouldn't need a base coat before I painted it gold. Here I made a Poseidon figure with his trident, and he's sort of leaning up against a wreath that's maybe made of like seaweed, and that all goes over the center of the stage. And then I also made a bunch of little winged cherubs just to fill in any extra space and add some more visual complexity. I sort of was going with a more is more approach here. These really help hide some of the crude sculpting work by overwhelming the eye with details. Finally, I created this sort of tasseled rope garland thing to line the proscenium. It really doesn't have any purpose other than just even more extra detail. And here's how everything was looking once it was baked and glued into place. We've got our mermaids on the box, and lots of cherubs, and a little clamshell that crowns the top. Over the stage we have our Poseidon and cherubs and seaweed, and finally we get to paint it all gold. I cannot emphasize enough how satisfying this step is. It really goes a long way in making some subpar sculpting look just delicious. Don't you want to eat it? Finally, I added these little gold ice cream cones, also made of Sculpey, and used some hot glue to make little fake glass fire domes that would go over the fiber optics. I really took a risk here because it turns out that hot things melt fiber optics, but magically, all of them work anyways. So, lucky me. For our two torch-bearing mermaids, I made the little hot glue pieces separately and then attached them at the end because I didn't want them to fall onto the wall behind. And here's how it's looking, all lit up for the very first time. Finally, I painted some curtains on the back wall. They look bad. Let's stop looking at them now. Then it was time to make 30 chairs. This step took me a month. No, I didn't film it. Yes, it was miserable.
Hey, Ron.
Hey, Billy.
So I wanted to do an inlaid wood floor with a zigzag pattern. So I started building up layers of like crisscrossing wood tones in contrasty tan and orange. And then at the end I went over all of it with a clear Mod Podge. Throughout this project I was constantly checking things with the mirror to make sure they looked right. I wasn't really in love with how the floor turned out, but it will be hidden under all those chairs, so it's fine. Next I cut out this sort of gear-like shape, glued a strip of cardboard to it, glued some little cardboard fingernails to it, and then glued another strip of cardboard to it, and then more hot glue. Finally I added some drops of crazy glue to the little cardboard fingernails. And once I painted everything the same way I did the walls, we have a lovely little stage with footlights. And it also gets fiber optic cables. Yay! Once the stage is finally glued into place and we test the mirror and lights one more time, I was ready to make the ceiling. So I started by drawing a sort of elongated oval with some fancy bits, you know, on the edges. And then those fancy bits were covered with, you guessed it, hot glue. By this point, I'd gotten quite comfortable with the glue gun, so I really tried to do some nice details with it. I was particularly happy with how the little crown edges looked on the top and sides, and then I moved on to paint. I started by painting the middle. I know that this should probably be like cherubs and women and, you know, people with fabric around them, but I was so sick of this project at this point that I just made it a nice little sunset. That's fine, it's very Baroque. I considered doing a two-tone green here, but I ended up thinking it looked bad, so I just went back to the standard wall color. And then gold trim. And finally, it was time to glue it into place.
This is the finishing touch of the smoothie. Very good.
I sculpted a curtain. I thought about doing fabric, but fabric looks wrong at small scale, and I wanted it to have that sort of heavy velvet rippled look that you get in big theaters. So I made it out of Sculpey, gave it a bunch of tassels, painted it dark blue, and then peachy, and then light blue, and then threw some gold over everything for old time's sake. Side note, I totally eyeballed this one and it didn't fit right. So once it was baked, I had to like sand it for hours to get it to sit properly. But this inadvertently created a little gap in between it and the mirror, which actually really sells the illusion, I think, because it sort of looks like there's, you know, stage behind it, and the light from the fiber optics setup sort of bleeds out, and it just looks good. With everything finally glued into place, including the final mirror, I made some Corinthian columns to hide the edges of the foam core. And off screen I beaded a little piece of fabric to sort of be a curtain for the front as just like a dust cover, because I'm not going to be looking at this all the time and I don't want it to get dusty. Finally, I trimmed the fiber optic cables so that they all ended at the same point and made a little shelf for the a battery operated tea light to sit on so that everything would light up. And just like that, we're done. So there you have it. The finished piece. Are you impressed? I'm impressed. I impressed the fuck out of myself with this. I have never really done anything like this before, but yeah, I was really proud of how it turned out. Particularly in person. I mean, it looks pretty good on camera, but in person, your eye just kind of glosses over all the details and really makes it look like you're looking at a tiny little ornate building. I really wasn't sure if the lights would work properly because I've never done fiber optics, but I was sure as fuck not gonna be like wiring LEDs for this. But maybe I'll do that in the future. If you want to see me, if you want to see me learn how to use LEDs, leave a comment down below. And yeah, that's it. That's the video. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.